The forest was alive with quiet whispers of nature, a symphony of rustling leaves, distant bird calls, and the faint hum of wind weaving through trees. Amid this serene backdrop, an Akita Inu roamed with purpose, its sharp eyes scanning the ground while its nose twitched, picking up subtle scents in the crisp air. The dog's movement was graceful yet deliberate, a creature entirely in tune with its surroundings. A faint, unfamiliar sound drifted through the calm, a low, pained groan carried on the wind. The Akita paused, ears perked and body tense. It turned its head toward the direction of the noise, curiosity and concern visible in its posture. The sound repeated, this time clearer, a deep, labored exhale that hinted at distress. Without hesitation, the dog moved toward the source, navigating through dense underbrush with a mix of caution and urgency. As the Akita approached the origin of the sound, the terrain shifted. The ground grew softer, the air heavier with the earthy smell of damp soil and stagnant water. Then it saw the source of the noise, a large elk trapped in a muddy swamp, its powerful legs sinking deep into the muck. The animal's sides heaved with effort, it struggled to free itself, only worsening its predicament. Mud coated its sleek fur, and its antlers, majestic even in this desperate moment, were tilted awkwardly as it tried to keep balance. The dog froze for a moment, observing the scene. Its sharp eyes darted from the elk's trembling legs to the surrounding swamp. The situation was dire, and the elk's time appeared limited. The Akita let out a sharp bark, the sound cutting through the stillness. It paced along the edge of the swamp, its movements calculated as if gauging the safest path to approach. The elk turned its head slightly at the sound, its eyes filled with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. The Akita seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. It stepped closer to the swamp's edge but stopped short, realizing its own limitations. Instead, it turned back, letting out a series of barks that echoed with urgency. The dog's body language was clear. It needed help. It moved swiftly now, weaving through the forest with a determination that was almost human in its intensity. The journey back was not without its challenges. The uneven ground and dense vegetation slowed the Akita, but it never faltered. Its focus remained sharp, its movements fluid as it navigated the familiar paths leading back to the trail. Every few moments, it would stop, ears swiveling to ensure the distressed elk's faint groans were still audible in the distance. This was not a task it would abandon. At last, the Akita broke through the forest's edge and into an open clearing. It scanned the area quickly before spotting a faint wisp of smoke rising from a campsite not far away. The dog bounded forward, its energy renewed by the sight. Reaching the campsite, it found a human figure tending to a small fire. Without hesitation, the Akita began barking loudly, tugging at the person's sleeve with its teeth. The human, startled at first, looked down at the dog. There was confusion in their expression, but the Akita's persistence quickly dispelled any doubt. It barked again, more urgently this time, and pulled at the sleeve with greater force. The human stood, sensing something was wrong. The Akita turned and ran a few paces toward the forest, then stopped, looking back to ensure it was being followed. Realizing the dog's intentions, the person grabbed a few items from the campsite, a rope, a sturdy stick, and began following the Akita. The dog led the way, its pace quick but steady, checking periodically to ensure its companion was close behind. The forest seemed denser now, the path narrower, but the Akita's confidence never wavered. It moved with an innate understanding of the terrain, its every step guided by a singular goal: to save the elk trapped in the swamp. As the pair drew closer to the swamp, the faint sounds of the elk's struggle grew louder. The human's face tightened with concern, and their pace quickened to match the Akita's. The dog, sensing the urgency, began barking again, as though encouraging its companion to hurry. The final stretch was treacherous, the ground soft and uneven, but the Akita navigated it with ease, its movements precise and purposeful. Finally, they arrived at the swamp's edge. The sight of the elk struggling in the mud was as heartbreaking as it was urgent. The Akita stopped, standing beside the human and looking up, its eyes pleading for action. The human took a deep breath, assessing the situation and readying themselves for the rescue effort. The Akita stood resolutely at the edge of the swamp, its posture tense as if willing the human to act quickly. The human set down the rope and stick, their eyes fixed on the struggling elk. The animal's breathing was labored, its sides rising and falling in a rhythm that conveyed both exhaustion and fear. Mud clung to its legs and flanks, and each small movement seemed to sink it deeper into the swamp. The human crouched briefly, examining the situation, before deciding on the best approach. The Akita stayed close, watching intently. Its presence was a strange comfort to the elk, whose wild gaze softened slightly in the dog's direction. As the human moved forward cautiously, the swamp sucked at their boots, the ground shifting precariously beneath their weight. They stretched out the rope, carefully looping it around one of the elk's front legs. The animal flinched at the contact but was too weak to resist. The human murmured softly, their tone calm and reassuring as they secured the knot. The first pull was tentative, testing the rope's hold and the elk's reaction. The animal let out a low grunt, its body shifting slightly but remaining stuck. The human adjusted their stance, digging their heels into the muddy ground for leverage. They leaned back with all their strength, the rope taut as it fought against the swamp's grip. The elk's front leg lifted slowly, emerging from the mud with a wet, sucking sound. The Akita barked once, its sharp tone cutting through the tension. It ran a short distance around the edge of the swamp, as if searching for a better angle to assist. The human glanced at the dog, their movements guided by the same urgency the Akita had displayed earlier. They repositioned the rope, securing it around a sturdier part of the elk's body for the next pull. This time, the human gave a stronger tug, and the elk responded by kicking weakly with its hind legs. Mud splattered as the animal's movements grew more desperate, its instincts to survive kicking in despite its exhaustion. The Akita darted closer, its presence steady and unwavering. Its eyes flicked between the human and the elk, a silent encouragement to keep going. The human's arms strained as they pulled again, each movement precise and deliberate. The elk's body shifted further, its chest now free of the thick mud. Its breathing quickened, a mix of panic and hope as it realized its progress. The human paused for a moment to catch their breath, wiping sweat from their brow, while the Akita remained alert, its tail wagging faintly as if sensing they were close to success. The final pull required everything the human had. They planted their feet firmly, leaning back with their entire weight, and the rope tightened to its limit. The elk gave one last powerful effort, its body surging forward as its hind legs broke free from the swamp's grasp. The animal collapsed briefly onto solid ground, its legs trembling beneath it. The Akita approached cautiously, its movements slow and deliberate to avoid startling the elk. The dog stopped a few feet away, its head tilted slightly as it observed the animal. The elk raised its head, meeting the Akita's gaze for a fleeting moment. There was something unspoken in that exchange, a shared understanding, a fleeting bond formed in the chaos of survival. The human knelt beside the elk, checking for visible injuries. While the animal was exhausted and coated in mud, there were no signs of severe wounds. The human stepped back to give it space, watching as the elk slowly tested its legs, first shifting its weight, then rising unsteadily. It stood there for a moment, swaying slightly, before turning its head toward the swamp as if acknowledging the danger it had narrowly escaped. The Akita wagged its tail, a soft bark breaking the quiet. The elk turned briefly toward the dog and the human, its gaze lingering before it took a cautious step forward. Then another. The animal's movements grew steadier as it walked toward the tree line, its powerful form silhouetted against the fading light. It paused once more at the edge of the forest, looking back one last time before disappearing into the dense greenery. The human let out a long breath, the tension in their body easing as they looked down at the Akita. The dog sat quietly now, its eyes still fixed on the spot where the elk had disappeared. The human reached down, giving the Akita a gentle pat on the head, their gratitude evident in the small gesture. Together, they turned and began the walk back to the campsite, the forest returning to its usual rhythm around them. The Akita trotted beside its companion, its posture proud but relaxed, as if it understood the importance of what they had just accomplished. The air felt lighter now, the weight of the moment giving way to a quiet sense of triumph. The swamp lay behind them, a reminder of the challenges they had faced, but also of the bond forged between a loyal dog, a determined human, and an animal that had found a second chance at life.